Last month's mass shootings in Atlanta and Boulder have put gun laws back in the spotlight. Despite decades of debate, lawmakers have been unable or unwilling to agree on any sort of national gun legislation. But some believe that common ground might be found in protecting children. According to a study released in the Journal of Urban Health, more than 4.5 million children in the U.S. live in homes with unlocked, loaded firearms. The new book, Children Under Fire: An American Crisis, highlights the dangers guns can pose to children and teens. It talks about the emotional impact school shootings have on kids and tells the stories of families who have lost children to preventable gun violence or accidents. The book's author, John Woodrow, joins us now. He's also an enterprise reporter at the Washington Post. Jonathan, thanks for being here. So you've spent the past few years covering gun violence and how guns impact children. What made you want to start writing this book and telling these stories?
So, the idea of the book really was to wake people up to what this crisis is doing to children in this country every day. But what I wanted to do was to do it in sort of a new way, and that was by telling these stories through the eyes of the children who are impacted. So, I spent weeks in these kids' lives, in their churches, schools, in their homes. I sat next to a little boy in church on the day of his father's funeral. I watched a girl suffering from debilitating PTSD deal with a violent episode that she just couldn't control because of what she had been through. I listened to a 6-year-old girl describe in vivid detail what had happened on the day that her brother was shot in a school shooting, and he was a first grader. So, the idea was to really give an intimate look into what what goes on with kids and how they're impacted every day. It's not just sort of what we see in the news. This is an everyday crisis in this country, and children who never get shot suffer for years and years and years because of what they've experienced.
Jonathan, I want to dig a little deeper into that because we're both journalists. We've covered school shootings, and whenever we do that, we are able to report on the physical damage, the death toll, the people injured, but less quantifiable is the emotional and psychological damage. Talk to us about what you found in these conversations with kids who have been through these shootings and how they say it's affected them.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, what the book really focuses mostly on children who did not get shot. And so they aren't suffering from those sort of physical wounds that we often associate with the real problems of gun violence. But that didn't stop them years and years later from dealing with really debilitating trauma. And that means nightmares. That means afraid of loud noises. These kids they'll hear a car backfire in a parking lot and they'll dive to the ground. I've seen that in cases over and over again. This one little girl who I followed for the book in South Carolina, she had to cover up scary words in books like gun and fire and shoot that she just couldn't stand to see because a boy that she loved died from gun violence. And, that shooting at her school, a teenager had pulled up to her playground and opened fire. It lasted 12 seconds. Only one child died. That's why most of us have never heard of that shooting. But she now, 5 years later, is still suffering from enormous amounts of trauma because of 12 seconds 5 years ago.
One of the conclusions from your book, in which you write that about 80% of school shooters take guns from their own homes or family members, you say that research actually suggests that if everyone in America just locked up their guns today, not get rid of that, not have any additional laws passed, but just locked up their guns, well, then the number of accidental deaths and suicides among kids and teens would drop by about 1/3. What exactly would those child access issues address, and can this be done without laws, or are laws necessary?
This is one of those policies that is so often overlooked in this debate. Everybody wants to talk about assault weapons, and certainly right now the Senate is debating the universal background checks, but the easiest thing that we could do to protect children from harm from guns is just to prevent them from getting access to them. And the studies show that law is backed by more evidence than any other, which means that it has more evidence of saving lives. A lot of states are now doing this at a local level. The federal government really hasn't even debated it. But this is one of those laws, too, that is bipartisan. There is almost universal support in America. It's 70% plus among gun owners who say that they support this, that they just believe that guns ought to be locked up so that kids can't get access to them. And it does nothing to deprive a gun owner from owning as many weapons as they want. It just says you have to be responsible with the guns that you have. School shootings, like as you mentioned, would be cut in half, if not more, if kids just didn't have access to weapons. The number of accidental shootings during this conversation, a kid somewhere in this country will in all likelihood find a gun and shoot themselves or a friend or a sibling or a parent. This happens constantly, and it is totally preventable.
Well, as you say, Jonathan, there is overwhelming support, nearly universal support, you said, among gun owners for just that simple common sense measure. There are, when you get out of the way of Congress and lawmakers and you talk to the people, there is support overwhelmingly on a bipartisan level for common sense gun reforms.
Right.
Why haven't we seen more progress when it comes to things that the American public actually really is behind on both a conservative and liberal spectrum?
Yeah, that's a question I get asked all the time, and you know the truth is that money is a big part of that. You know, if the senators on Capitol Hill were voting strictly by what their constituents wanted, a lot of these laws would be passed already. Things like universal background checks. Some polls have that at 90% plus support for it. But the lobbies, the gun lobby, the NRA, opposes almost any new gun law. And they are a really fierce opponent. If you're a Republican in a conservative place and the NRA has told you, if you vote this way, we're going to come after you, or maybe we're going to back another candidate, that's a really scary proposition. And there are many gun owners who have been sort of fooled into the idea that any gun law is a threat to their owning a gun at all. They think that their gun will be taken away if any small law gets passed, and that's a lie. It's just not true. Many of these laws would do nothing to deprive law-abiding gun owners of keeping their weapons. But you know, a lot of people also forget that in the aftermath of the Sandy Hook shooting, when President Obama was pushing gun legislation, that got 57 votes in the Senate. So it was really the filibuster that stood in the way, even then, of these laws passing. And, you know, that's sort of what is happening now again. It's a question of will they get to those 60 votes? But certainly if they vote according to what their constituents want, then these laws would pass.
So, Jonathan, what do you hope that your book is going to show people about how we should view guns and gun regulations?
You know, I think, I hope it shows them that it doesn't take radical change for us to radically alter the lives of children every day in this country. And it's not just the school shootings. Really, the kids who suffer the most are the ones in cities where they have to deal with random gunfire all the time. And it's so much bigger. I think that's really the hope, the takeaway that I hope people get from this is that it's so much larger than we think. It's not just the hundreds of kids who get shot every year. It's also all these kids who are in proximity to shootings, who go through lockdowns in their schools. Millions of kids go through actual lockdowns, not just the drills, but actual lockdowns every year. And what that does to some of them is they think, I might get shot in my school. And they say, you know, they write goodbye to their parents. So it's bigger than just the headlines. And the headlines are the kids who get shot. It is so much larger than that. This is a crisis that affects millions and millions of children in a really deep and profound way. And that's what I hope people come away with. And also the hope that it doesn't take that much. It will not take that much for us to make an enormous difference in these kids' lives.
John Woodrow Cox, thank you.
Thank you.